From American University, this is the DC Journal.
Good morning. I'm Jake Baum.
And I'm Rachel Becker. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of the DC Journal. For the past 15 months, students and professors at AU have had to adapt to a new life relatively quickly. Caroline Sachs reports.
Every person around the world has been affected by COVID in the last year and a half. Schools all around the country have had to adapt to different ways to hold classes and provide their students with the opportunity to learn. And at American University, it is no different.
In late January, we were telling people, hey, you may have heard about this thing called COVID. There are no cases here. A few weeks later, we had to bring students home from China. Then all of a sudden, students were on spring break and we said, whoops, we're gonna go with remote classes just for 3 weeks. The next day, we said, oh no, we're remote the entire spring semester.
As COVID shifted the way American University planned out their school year, they still made it a point for their students to reach out to the public and try to find new ways to have similar opportunities as done in the past.
In some cases, students may not have been able to be in a situation where they could have interned with this particular company in person. But we also created a virtual tutoring corps. So we provided tutoring for the children of our faculty and staff. And I think those students seized the opportunity and created something for themselves and for others, which will carry on further on into their lives.
With online platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, not only did students get creative, but they discovered and delved into new interests. The way students communicate and their perspectives are forever changed because of the pandemic.
The other thing that we learned during the pandemic was that you could hold very successful virtual events. We have the Kennedy Political Union here. They hosted Anthony Fauci. They hosted Stacey Abrams. In normal times, when you're not doing these online, the number of people who can join is very limited, the number of people who can come into the room. So I think this really shows that there is a future in the virtual world for these sorts of things. And I think without the horrible and very unfortunate pandemic, that is something we may not have realized.
While COVID has offered many negative aspects, after our interview with Ms. Stark, we were overwhelmed with the numerous positives. Students at American University dealt with many struggles, but were also given many opportunities, such as viewing a lecture with Dr. Fauci himself. For the DC Journal, I'm Caroline Sachs, Washington, D.C.
We would like to thank Lisa Stark for giving us an insight into how AU kept up to date and made changes for their campus during times of high stress during COVID.
American isn't the only university that has been faced with challenges. Schools around the country have been forced to respond in their own unique ways. Halden Dyer has more on how different student schools have combated the issues at hand.
Thank you. During this unprecedented time, high school students were forced to make a multitude of changes to their social and school life. I asked a couple of students in the NSLC program about how their schools adapted and responded to the COVID-19 pandemic.
COVID-19, the global pandemic that disrupted virtually every part of our lives, swept across the nation in March 2020. With the introduction of virtual and hybrid school, students struggled with burnout, Zoom fatigue, and overall tiredness of the unparalleled situation that was taking precious time away from critical high school years. Students lost important face-to-face time with teachers and fellow classmates.
So when you first went into lockdown, what were the mask restrictions like? And when you went back to school, did they change at all or?
So the mask restrictions where I lived, we started right away March 13th, 2020. And when we had to go back to school, we had to, the classes were only at half capacity.
When you first went into lockdown, like what were the mask restrictions like? And did they change over the course of this past year?
When COVID was starting, we didn't have mask restrictions until about the beginning of April. We went into quarantine for about 2 months and everything kind of opened up around mid-May.
I took to the AU campus to ask students attending NSLC about how their schools in different parts of the United States dealt with the threat of COVID in the 2020-2021 school year. I asked if their schools had COVID testing procedures.
There were no testing requirements for my school. If you did test positive for COVID and you were within the vicinity of someone who tested positive, the school required that you get tested and quarantined, but there were no official testing rules.
This past year has certainly presented many challenges for high school students. As a proud member of the class of 2022, I can only hope that this year will be more normal. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Halden, for the insight into high school students' lives during the pandemic. I myself, as an incoming senior, can empathize with the last few senior classes who were robbed of their final high school experiences. We wish all incoming seniors good luck in the following school year.
I don't know about you, Jake, but I was thrilled to come to DC and get away from all of the mosquitoes back home in Florida.
You may have been leaving the mosquitoes behind, but DC brings other issues. Ollie Courier brings us more.
If you've spent any time in states such as Maryland or Virginia, you've likely heard this loud and bothersome noise. This sound is none other than the mating call of the cicadas, a species of insect that emerges every 17 years in massive numbers. Mike Mastroda, the Arboretum Manager and Landscape Architect here at American University, shared his understanding of the cicadas.
What they're doing now is they're mating up in the treetops, and then the females will lay their eggs by making like a little slit in the branches of the trees, so small branches. Once those eggs hatch, they drop to the ground, and the nymphs will bury themselves down in the ground, and they will feed for 17 years on tree roots.
Cicadas can be seen all around the AU campus and have likely spooked you, but Mastroda assures us that the people have nothing to worry about.
The only thing that they're harmful about is the little slits that they make in the branches for their eggs. They can damage the branches, and actually, some of the small branches can die back, but that's about it.
Mastroda says not to be afraid of these insects, however. He looks at them with awe and even finds humor in their existence.
A little funny side note, I was over at some friend's house over the weekend. They have a beagle who's older, about maybe 8, 10 years old, and he's gained 7 pounds eating cicadas in the past few weeks.
Signing off for the DC Journal, I'm Ollie Courier. Back to you.
Thank you, Ollie, for reassuring us about the true nature of these fascinating insects.
There's been a lot of buzz going around American University's campus. Here we have Ava Seaborn sharing an amazing story with us.
Beekeeping has existed in the United States for over 100 years, dating back to the 1860s. Bees play a fundamental part in the world's ecosystem. I spoke with Chris LaPlaca, who monitors bees at American University, to learn about the vital roles of bees around the world. Bee populations have staggered since 2016. And as of 2020, it has been shown that the main contributors to the loss of bee colonies are varied from pesticides to habitat destruction to air pollution. Humans do contribute to the decline of bee colonies.
I am the pest control coordinator for the American University. I take care of all the pest control issues on campus. I also take care of the honeybees. Today we are inside the courtyard in the Mary Graydon second floor. Where we keep our bees.
We asked LaPlaca to address some of the factors contributing to the recent decline of honeybee colonies.
The effect on bee colonies right now is there's a disease called white nose syndrome. What we can do is use less insecticides. We can leave the honeybee hives alone. We can report wild honeybee hives that can be picked up by beekeepers and brought back and made to thrive.
We appreciate the amazing opportunity to experience a bee colony firsthand. It was very insightful into the realm of bees and beekeeping. This truly helped us understand the current state they are in and how to help them. Today we have learned that without bees, plants that rely on pollination for reproduction could very well go extinct. As we begin to notice the detrimental effects of the decline in bee colonies, we must begin to realize how we are impacting the bee colonies and help to bring them back.
Thank you, Ava, for that incredible story of the bees. We can see how much bees play a part in our society and how important they are.
Art has been a staple of DC culture for decades, from the Smithsonian to the National Art Gallery. Thousands of pieces have been displayed across the city. But just down the street at the Katzen Art Center, a new exhibit is ready to be displayed. Owen Murray is on the scene to give us a preview.
Here at American University, the Katzen Art Center has been a staple of the campus for 16 years. Recently, their newest exhibit, The Long 60s, is preparing for its debut. I spoke with Jack Rasmussen, the director and curator of this exhibit, about the artists, their paintings, and the exhibit as a whole.
Jack Rasmussen has seen his fair share when it comes to rights. When he was younger, he participated in the 60s civil rights movement for African Americans and women.
My favorite quote is by Ralph Steadman, who's a cartoonist, British cartoonist, but he said, when we were young, we were going to change the world, and we did. It's much worse now.
using works from 60s era of African American and female artists that express their true feelings and thoughts, and contrasting it with white male artists who dominated the DC art scene with more minimalist art. It shows a power struggle that represented not only the pushback of these minorities in art, but in society as a whole.
During a very tumultuous period of time, the 60s, assassinations, war, riots, etc., Washington art was without content. It was just decorative. It was flat, and it was not meant to excite anything other than, I guess, sort of calm appreciation.
But due to the pandemic, the entire exhibit has not been open, leaving the art and the entire museum closed for over a year, with the hope being a more relaxed summer so they can open sooner rather than later.
To be honest, I'm not the biggest art connoisseur, but as the first person to take a tour of the long 60s, the experience was captivating. In the context of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, it reminded me that even though the battle is won, the war is long. I'm Owen Marie from the Katzen Art Center.
Thank you so much, Owen. I never knew how much power and symbolism an art exhibit could possess. I'm Rachel Becker.
And I'm Jake Baum.
Thank you for watching the DC Journal.
This past year, sorry, oh my god.
Now it's recording.
You guys able to see? Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is